Hey guys, so I'm discussing about frameworks in assessment. In this discussion, there are actually two frameworks in assessment. One of the framework is referred to as your classical test theory. And then I will be focusing this discussion on the second framework, which is your item response theory. Now guys, let's talk about your item response theory. When I say class item response theory, it says that the analysis of the items can be estimated by the probability that an examinee answers an item correctly or incorrectly. Okay? So again, class item response theory. According to this theory in item response, it can be analyzed um, uh, analyzes items by estimating the probability. It talks about your probability that you can get the question correctly or incorrectly. Okay, that's the main focus because of your item response theory. It also assumes, dear students, that the characteristic of an item can be estimated independently of the characteristics or ability of the examinee and vice versa. So in the previous theory, the CTT class, the CTT tells us that all kinds of measurements would have errors. And then it also tells us that for us to estimate the score of an individual, your CTT tells us that we need to consider the score of the individual themselves and then the error of measurement that might occur. That's the main focus of your CTT. Whereas class for your item response theory, also being referred to as your IRT, it says that the characteristic of an item can be estimated independently of the characteristic or ability of the examinee and vice versa, which tells us class that we can know the performance of our students based on the items and their responses. Now, in IRT class, the analysis would be leading towards item difficulty, item discrimination, your fit statistics, your ICC, and then your TCC. Your ICC class stands for item characteristic curve, and then test characteristic curve. If you would look at this IRT, these topics class will be discussed on the near finals already. But if we would compare the two theories, the inclination as of present is to use your CTT compared to your IRT. But there are also instances wherein your IRT are being used. No? So particularly class, if you would want a test to become diagnostic. Okay, class, usually this is used among diagnostic tests. So when I say diagnostic test, if I would want to confirm if a learner has a learning problem, learning difficulty, the items that are being administered to that student class will be subjected to IRT analysis. Now, let's talk about the different types of assessment. Okay, there are various categories of assessment. So perhaps one that you've heard of is your formative and your summative assessment. The common ones class that we differentiate is your formative and your summative assessment. Now class, you have your formative assessment. When we talk about your formative assessment, dear students, your formative assessment provide information to both the teachers and the learners on how can they improve, okay, on how can they improve class your teaching learning process. Now look at that class. It says how to improve the teaching learning process. Okay, it is used at the beginning and during the instructions. Now highlight those words that I am emphasizing to you because they will be the key differentiation between your formative assessment and then your summative assessment. So class, ibig sabihin, when I'm doing a formative assessment, for example, right now, I will ask you, guys, what is formative assessment? Right there and then, I'm trying to know if you understood the topic that I am discussing right here. Okay? Class, I'm trying to know whether you understood the topic that I just talked about. That is what you refer to as your formative assessment. Plus, in our parlance, we usually say, I don't know if you've encountered already the terms assessment for learning. Then you also have assessment of learning. And then you also have class your assessment as learning. Okay, assessment as learning. So the four types of assessment, the three types, I mean, the for learning, of learning, and as learning. Now, when I talk about formative assessment, another way of presenting your formative assessment is saying it is assessment for learning. Why is it assessment for learning? It assesses class, it assesses It assesses the knowledge, understanding, and skills to inform the teacher whether she is doing right in such a way that she can modify whenever there is a need to do so. Okay? In other words, class, it occurs throughout our discussion for the teacher and learning process to clarify whether student learns and understand the topic that we have. So as you can see, it is used at the beginning and during the instruction. For example, if you're starting a lesson in science, maybe you would want to start by asking the question, what is the main source of energy? Okay? If our topic is energy, maybe you would ask, what is the main source of energy? Okay? Because you would want to know if what are the main sources of energy that your student understand. So if you're a science teacher, of course, you first think of the sun. But then other students would think it's the power plant, it's electricity. So you would want to hear that. That is an example of formative assessment. Right? So as early as this time, my dear students, you should be able to understand that when I say assessment, it's not all about scores. So for example, in this formative assessment, we are just eliciting the response. For example, I will ask you, for those who understand the slide that I'm discussing, kindly give me a heart react. For those who understand the slide that I am discussing, kindly give me a heart react. Okay? Sige nga, I would want to see heart reacts. Okay? Class, that is an example of formative assessment. Okay? So example, right now, I can see that only 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, how many students? Okay, less than half of my students are saying that they understand the topic. Meaning, class, that gives me an idea, oops, need ko siya i-reinforce. Okay, that's formative assessment. Okay, so look at this. The goal is how can they improve the teaching learning process? Formative assessment. Now, if you would look into the next slide, it also allows class, no? It allows the teacher to make adjustments to the instructional process and strategies to facilitate learning. O for example, I've noticed na, konti lang yung nag-heart ng formative assessment. Let me confirm nga if ever they understood it or not. So what might I do is that I will call your names, for example, randomly. I will ask, John Paul, can you explain to me what is formative assessment? Or Joanna, can you explain to me what do we mean by assessment for learning? Okay? That way, class, I will be able to facilitate the learning process. Because if I will be doing it at the end of the lesson, it might be too late already. Okay? It might be too late already at the end of the lesson, and then here comes your students, and then they do not understand what you're talking about. So for that reason, class, we do your formative assessment. Then, class, this also informs the learners about their strengths and weaknesses to enable them to improve. Okay? To enable improvement on the part of your learner. Okay? So for example, during class, no, if you have your pupils in a certain elementary school, and then you've noticed that all of your students or all of your pupils are writing down, however, you have these 2 students who is not writing. Okay? Kasi class, parang pagod daw siya palagi mag-write or parang hindi niya gustong mag-write. So as a teacher, as an educator, you might want that student to be transferred in the front seat of the class because you would want to give more attention to that student. Right there and then, my dear colleagues, that's already your formative assessment because you are thinking, this student, pag hindi pa to makakasulat, sooner or later, magdi-delay to. Once delay to, magiging frustrated lang to sa klase, hindi niya maiintindihan. Okay? In the same way, for example, you will ask the students to go to the board, or maybe you ask the students to raise their answers when you say 2 plus 3. And then everybody is raising 5. But here comes this pupil of yours who said 2 plus 3 is 4. So you need to give more attention to that student. Okay? Right there and then, you are adjusting your instructional process to facilitate the learning. Because if your student could not answer the 2 plus 3, how much more later on class if you're having your complex additions already? Okay? So that's why we are having your formative assessment. Now, let's speak for example, try to read silently the question posted on the screen. If you have your answers, please chat your answers. If you have your answers, please chat your answers. Okay, yeah, just chat the letter of your choice. So Teacher Anna is reviewing the relevance of formative and summative assessment. The following describes formative assessment. Exam, used to improve the teaching learning process. B, used at the beginning and during instruction. C, allows the teacher to make adjustments. D, determine the learner's mastery of the content. Okay? Now, class, this is what we refer to as your live multiple choice. Okay? Sir, applicable lang yan sa online class? No, this is even applicable if you're having your face-to-face discussions. Okay? Class, you call that your live multiple choice. And that is an example of your formative assessment. Okay? So right here and then, I can see that most of your responses are D. So I can tell myself that, okay, my students are understanding the topic that I am talking about. Okay? Now, let's have some incidental learning on this example. If you can notice, class, the word except is placed on all caps. Okay? If you have noticed, the word except is placed on all caps. Dear students or dear fellow educators, this is part of your test construction. Okay, so class, when you say test construction, how do we conduct examinations properly? So class, when you are conducting your examinations, when you are writing your examinations, my dear students, it should be in all caps. Okay, it should be in all caps. Okay, keywords such as except, keywords such as all but one. Okay, ano pa nga ba? Ano pa? All of the following, things like that, you make it all caps. Okay? You know what? Some educators would have the feel na, uy, sige lang, wag mong i-all caps. Small letter mo lang para malaman natin kung nagbabasa siya or hindi. Okay? Remember, class, you are not there as an educator to trap your students. You are there to give them the clues as to how to respond to that. Okay? Class, so except, words such as except, and then you notice all but one. Okay? Or or if you would say, select all that apply. Okay, select all that apply is a difficult type of exam. So class, all of them should be written in all caps. Okay? Then if you could notice, I am not so sure, but I actually read and reread this if ever there is a grammatical error. So class, we avoid that there should be a grammatical error. Then, excuse me. Once class you are writing your examinations, there should be an introductory sentence, and then there should be a question, and then there will be your choices. So you could not, it's not wise for you to make a multiple choice item and then start by saying, what is assessment? Okay? No, it does not give the student a hint. It does not trigger the brain of the student first to think. Whereas this one, Teacher Anna is reviewing the relevance of formative and summative assessment. What does it tell the one who answers it? It tells him or her that, oh, the question is about formative and summative assessment. That way, class, by the next sentence, she already has the trigger as to how to respond to the question. Okay? Then, later on, when you are making your exams, one pitfall also that we have is we commonly place the answer at letter A, or we commonly place the answer at letter D. As educators, we need to spread the answers between A, B, C, and D. So, hindi pwede, class, na puro lang A, hindi pwede na puro lang B, hindi rin pwede na puro lang C. In the same way, for example, if you're creating the true or false examinations, hindi pwede, class, na lahat false. Ha? Hindi pwede na lahat false. Hindi din pwede na lahat true. Okay? Especially, class, if it is a modified true or false exam, you know, some would have a tendency, sige, i-false natin lahat para mag-critical thinking yung student. And guys, kung i-false mo lahat, bakit ka pa nagpa-true or false? Okay? It defeats the purpose. It defeats the purpose. Okay, and as you can see on this next slide, that's supposed to be where my answer is. Why did I place this slide? This is just to remind you that your slide could be used as a prompt. Okay, your slide plus is actually your prompt. For example, if it is your first time to educate pupils, if it is your first time to educate professionals or whatever first time that is, okay, make use of your slides as your prompt. Anong ibig ko sabihin ng prompt? For example, kapag kinulit niyo ako sa klase ko, at least alam ko na D yung answer dyan. Or for example, kapag nangdilim yung paningin ko kasi gutom ako, alam ko na ay D ang sagot dyan. Hindi ako mawawala. Okay? So you can use your PowerPoint as your prompt. Now, another example is, if I will ask you the question, what did you learn from our lesson last week? Okay? What did you learn from our lesson last week? Of course, dapat best ko itong tinanong kanina at the start of the class, di ba? Okay? But what I'm giving you here is only an idea of how to ask your formative assessment. Okay? So at the start of the class, you can ask your pupils, what did you learn last week? Okay? Tapos pag walang sumasagot, if you can recall, we talked about energy last week. What can you recall about energy? Tapos for example, sumasagot si Trixia, tapos sinamahan naman siya ni Annie, pagkatapos ni Danel. Okay? Class, pag silang tao yung palaging nagsasalita sa klase nyo, give chance to others. So by next meeting, pag magtanong ka ulit, okay guys, what have you learned last week? Or what can you recall last week? You give chance naman dun kay Marden, kay Chelsea, at saka kay Micah. Okay? Kasi class, for example, no, alam niyo yung mga valedictorian, di ba yung tendency ng mga valedictorian, salutatorian, mga with honors, parang sila na lang yung palaging nasa klase, no? Parang sila yung bida sa klase. It's okay, as teachers, you need to continuously motivate them. Okay? Huwag niyong patayin, ha? Huwag niyong patayin ang motivation ng isang batang very motivated. So, bawal mo ding sabihin na ay first honor yan. Hayaan mo na yan. Huwag mo nang pansinin kasi matalino yan. If you will do that, class, you are killing the motivation of the child. So what would you do? Just distribute. Okay? Just distribute. If you notice that more than 50% of your students have difficulty, no? Okay? May difficulty silang mag-verbalize, may difficulty silang mag-recite. So what would you do? Class, i-prompt mo na sila. Okay? This week, ditong side yung magre-recall. Next week, the second row will be doing the recall or second column. The third week, it will be the third column people who will be doing the simple recall. Para ma-anticipate nila na dapat sila na by next week, dapat mag-prepare sila. Okay? Are you getting my point? So these are simple examples and I think you are aware of this already, but we are doing that now. So class, what did you learn from last week? That's also another way, class, for us to bridge our topic from the last week to the next week, okay, or to the present. Kasi class, anong tendency? Dapat paintindi nyo sa students nyo that what they're learning right now is connected to the topic last week. And this will be connected to the topic in the future. Okay? Or else useless. Sabihin ng estudyante, why would I even listen to her? Diba? Okay? Pwede pa naman akong matulog for today's video. Parang ganon. Okay? Now, let's talk about summative assessment. Class, if your formative assessment, no? Okay, if your formative assessment is assessment for learning, okay, remember class, your formative assessment is being referred to as assessment for learning. Class, your summative assessment is, okay, your summative assessment is assessment of learning. It is considered assessment of learning. So class, pag sinabi nating assessment of learning, it is evaluation against outcomes. Okay, it is already your evaluation. Palitan natin ang color. Okay, class, it is already your evaluation against outcomes. So, ibig sabihin, if my goal is for you to understand the parts of the flower, at the end of the day, okay, or at the end of the lesson, I'm giving you a quiz. And that quiz is intended if you can identify indeed the parts of the flower. Okay, that's already your summative assessment. Plus, the aim is to determine the learner's mastery of content or attainment of learning outcomes. Okay, so oftentimes, class, we associate the term summative assessment to your evaluation. Okay, we associate it with evaluation. Or if you would apply English there, okay, assessment of learning. I said assessment of learning. In other words, class, ina-assess ko ang nalaman ng student ko. Okay? It provides information on the quantity and quality that the student learned or achieved. Learned or achieved. Ibig sabihin na learn na, na-achieve na at the end of instruction. If you can notice, kanina sa formative, when do we do formative assessment, dear colleagues? Kailan natin ginagawa yung formative assessment? Anybody?
Before and during, sir.
Okay. So class, the keyword there is before and during. No? Before, class, and during. And then if you would look at your summative, it says here at the end. Okay? Now tell me guys, what's a very common example of summative assessment? Give me a very common example of summative assessment na ginagawa natin, ini-experience nyo. What is that? Anybody?
Exam, sir.
Exams. And what particular type of exams? What particular type of exams?
Finals.
Okay, finals. Yeah, your major examinations are actually forms of your summative assessment. Okay? Among your pupils, later on, you have your first grading, second grading, third grading, then your fourth grading, especially class your fourth grading, it's already a form of your summative assessment. Yes, unit test actually is also a form of your summative assessment. Okay? So as you can notice, summative assessment is already inclined on evaluation. Then it is used to evaluate learners' performance in class. And then it provides the teacher's class with information about the effectiveness of teaching strategies and how can they improve instruction in the future. So sa future na siya, kumbaga in the next teaching opportunity, hindi na siya class within the topics. And then inform learners what they have done well and what do they need to improve. That's one important thing, that you need to be able to inform your learners kung saan sila magaling at kung anong areas ang dapat nilang improve. Now, I would want to emphasize this part. Plus, it provides teachers with the information about the effectiveness of teaching strategies. So, pag mababa po ang score ng students ninyo in a particular exam, do not blame your students. I would like to repeat that, ha. Kadalasan kasi, for example, na tayo, yung mga pag past, present, and future, madali lang sa atin yung past, present, and future, di ba? Past, present, and future tense are easy things for us to understand. However, class, if your students, for example, would be on the past progressive, present progressive, and then future progressive, it's already difficult for us to discern it. No? So, ano pong ibig sabihin kapag hindi nila naintindihan or kapag mababa po yung score nila sa exam ninyo? Hindi po student ang unang titingnan nyo bilang problema. Ang problema po is na sa effectiveness of teaching strategy natin. Okay? For example, class, I'm not saying that I'm really a good educator, but let's say, for example, that if I'm just reading everything from the textbook, will you be listening to me? Diba tendency hindi? Sir, bakit pa kami mag-a-attend ng klase mo? Okay? Tendency is that doon na lang kami, magbabasa na lang kami ng textbook pag magkaganon. So class, your summative assessment actually reflects your performance as a teacher. And because I'm saying that, some teachers would again have the tendency to, sige, let's make our exam easy para mamaya ako yung magaling na teacher. Okay? That's also a fallacy. Ha? So don't do that. Na ay, gawin nating madali yung exam para na mataas yung score ng students. So no, that's not how it works. Okay? Then other than that, class, at the end of your summative assessment, inform your students. Students, I've noticed that most of you got perfect on the questions about the types of energy. Okay, most of you was able to identify, the simple tenses of the verb. But when we talk about the progressive tenses already and then the other tenses there that you have, okay, we can see that there is a difficulty. So for that, please try to review tonight. By tomorrow, I will recap that topic. Okay? That way, alam ng estudyante mo, ay, medyo need ko palang mag-improve dyan. Okay? So what is one purpose of your summative assessment. Now, the next types of assessment are diagnostic. Okay? Now, I will be discussing this na on the succeeding discussion.